Hello lovely passengers and welcome to this channel's first ever non-Snowpiercer video. I thought that the interlude between seasons would be a great chance for me to discuss some of the other things I love. This video will contain spoilers for the US version of The Office. So when I watched The Office for the first time, something really stood out to me about the characters. They're all terrible people. Now, that's not exactly unique among sitcoms. Community, Parks and Rec, Friends, and of course Always Sunny in Philadelphia all contain a cast of characters that are flawed and selfish. It's part of what makes them funny. However, The Office ran for 9 seasons. During that whole period, we're given great insights into the characters and their lives and personalities, and we see that some of them are definitely worse than others. I'll get to the list in just a moment, but first I should explain, morality and how bad a person is obviously a very subjective thing. I'll be focusing almost solely on the bad things the characters do, and the severity of their crimes will be measured by the amount of pain they cause others. Also, just because someone is very early on the list does not mean I think they're a good person, it just means that I think everyone else is worse. I should also mention I won't be including the main characters that are introduced later in the series, such as Robert, Erin, Gabe, or Nellie. So, without further ado, let's begin. In 16th place, the least vile in the main Office cast, Daryl. Now, personally, I think Daryl is a little too dispassionate for my liking. He's not the sort of person I'd hang out with in real life, but that doesn't change the fact that he's basically a good dude. I could list a lot of good stuff that Daryl does, but that's not the purpose of this video, so let's talk about the bad things he's done. He got angry at Toby and Dwight when they shouted at his sister. Totally understandable. He got really grumpy when the warehouse crew won the lottery and he missed out. Also understandable. And he also took advantage of Toby's desperation to overcharge him for that doll that both their daughters wanted. Again, kind of understandable, but that doesn't make it right. I think it's probably the single worst thing he does in this series, but compared to most of the other characters, it's small potatoes. I wouldn't say he's a great guy, but he's pretty chilled out and down to earth most of the time. In 15th place is Toby Fletcher. So much bad stuff is done to Toby over the course of the series that he barely has time to do bad to others. His flaws are as follows. He is initially unwilling to accept it when Jim and Pam start dating because of his crush on Pam. He tells them to hold off on signing a relationship form, obviously hoping that their relationship won't last. In the episode where he buys a doll, he says, "This is great. My ex-wife's going to be pissed, and for once, Daddy's going to be a hero." Now, it's totally understandable that Toby would want to be loved by his daughter, and it's easy to imagine that as divorced parents a rivalry would form, but the fact that he mentions annoying his ex-wife first and being a hero to his daughter second does call his true motivations into question. Toby's biggest crime, however, is his ineptitude as an HR rep. Now, he does try. He lets people vent to him, he lets Michael know when he's doing something inappropriate, he's a diligent note-taker and keeps good files, but he's also a pushover. It's Toby's job to keep the toxicity in the office under control, and he fails. Toby is not a good person, but everyone else in the office is worse. Number 14 is Kelly. Kelly is totally self-absorbed, and it allows her to talk about herself for a long time without ever thinking that people might not want to listen. That makes her bad, but it doesn't make her terrible. This is what makes her terrible. She dresses like a bride at Phyllis's wedding, she relentlessly pursues Ryan even though he's clearly uninterested and uncomfortable. She also lies to Ryan about being pregnant in an attempt to entrap him. In fairness, she gives it up pretty quick but remains unable to concede that what she did was wrong. She also flirts with Daryl in front of Ryan in an attempt to make him jealous. Oh, and she leaves her fiancé to run away with Ryan, which is bad, but again, not as bad as the other characters. Number 13 is Pam. Pam is a strong contender for number 16. She spends most of the series as a gentle and compassionate person. But let's not forget she flirts with Jim while she's engaged to Roy. Now, she and Roy were not good for each other, and it's good that she finally managed to break up with him, but while she was with him, she should have remained faithful to him. She also continues to flirt with Jim while he's dating Karen. Now, you can argue that Pam wasn't intending to flirt with Jim, and I think that's probably true, but she should have known that what she was doing was not appropriate while she was engaged, or while Jim was dating Karen. In fact, I'm sure that deep down she did know, but she chose to brush it off by continually claiming that they were just friends. This landed her in 13th place. She's also an accessory to Jim's pranking of Dwight, and she doesn't pay attention while filming Cecilia's dance, even though Jim really wanted to see it. Number 12 is Kevin. Kevin is a misogynist. He has no qualms about talking openly and sexually about different women. His behaviour is disgusting. Having said that, at least he never says any of it to their faces, which makes him better than Michael. He also laughs at Oscar, his friend, when he finds out he's gay, even though it's clearly very upsetting to Oscar. Coming in at number 11 is Phyllis. Phyllis often appears to be a pleasant and tolerant person. She's patient with Angela after she broke up with Dwight. She's also very quick to forgive Michael after he tries to steal the spotlight at her wedding. However, she does occasionally make very scathing remarks and can also be quite manipulative. When she realizes that Angela is cheating on Andy, she keeps it a secret and blackmails Angela for her own benefit, even though she can see the harm that is being done to Andy. The worst crime she admits to on camera is that she often dresses provocatively when she's out with Bob Vance Refrigeration, because she likes it when people come and flirt with her and she can watch Bob beat them up. This is cruel to both her husband and to the stranger she lures in, and hints to her selfishness and sadistic tendencies. And I wanted to comment on this line. I think the writers went too far with this one. I don't think that level of cruelty and carelessness is consistent with Phyllis's character, but when a show has multiple writers, they each have their own slightly different takes on a character, and every now and then they have them do something that's just a bit too mean. And I think this is one of those times. It feels like they cross some indefinable line. Number 10 is Meredith. Meredith is a nymphomaniac and an alcoholic, but that doesn't necessarily make her a bad person. Here's what does make her a bad person. She unashamedly sexually harasses any man she finds attractive, asking them for sex and flashing them. She also leaves her son Jake alone when she goes on one-night stands. She sleeps with people for financial gain and revels in it. Now, you could argue that Meredith deserves to be lower on the list since her poor parenting has a severe negative impact on her son's life. However, we can't know for sure that Jake would have turned out much differently even if Meredith had been a better mother. Being a single mother is hard, and I don't want to downplay that. After Pam has to look after her own kids by herself for a few days, she tells Meredith that she respects her strength. Having said that, Meredith definitely could have been a better mother. Number 9 is Jim. Now, at face value, Jim seems to be an okay guy. He's easygoing, his relationship with Pam is pretty good for the most part, and he comforts Dwight and Michael when they're upset. But Jim has flaws that run deep. He bullies Dwight for over a decade, and anytime he starts to think about giving it up, he rationalizes it by telling himself that Dwight deserves it. The first time he pranks Andy when they're at Stanford, Andy seems to have done very little to deserve it. It clearly makes Andy really angry, and yet Jim continues to do it. Jim's pranking is, in a word, merciless. When he hides Andy's phone, he keeps calling it, even as Andy keeps getting more and more angry and upset, and only stops when Andy has already put a hole in the wall, when Jim has already pushed him over the edge. I'm also convinced that Jim is the reason for the rift between himself and Dwight. Dwight cannot have been an easy person to get along with, but by the time the show starts, Jim has clearly decided to make Dwight his enemy rather than even attempt a casual friendship with him. In addition to his pranking, he also flirts with Pam while she's engaged to Roy, and is probably more aware than she is that what he was doing is wrong. Number 8 is Andy. Andy has something like a redemption arc throughout the season. He's a very flawed person and remains a very flawed person, but he doesn't remain the total jerk that he appears to be in season 3. However, we have to take into account all the bad they do in the series. When we first meet him, Andy is a ruthless climber. His main goal at work is to rise above his colleagues and get promotions and raises. We must also consider his secondary goal of sleeping with the best-looking women in the office. Like Kevin, he's a misogynist, albeit a slightly more successful one. He does become something of a better person after his anger management course, but he's still not very considerate and doesn't really have any morals. When he goes away for 3 months, he practically doesn't contact Erin at all. He also doesn't tell David Wallace that he's on holidays, and it's pretty safe to assume that he was still collecting his manager's salary during those 3 months, which is obviously illegal. On the other hand, though, David does find out about it and lets him off. In addition to this, he asks Oscar to fudge the numbers so it'll look like Andy has doubled his quarterly sales, showing that impressing his superiors is still a priority to him. More of a priority, in fact, than obeying the law. As a side note, I'm currently studying to become an accountant, and our professors often warn us that we may one day be put in the same situation that Andy puts Oscar in. Number 7 is Michael. Now, Michael is totally and willfully oblivious to what is socially appropriate. It's no surprise that he hates the company's PR rep. He says awful things to people on a regular basis. He's always putting Dwight down and regularly sexually harasses Pam. Now, I've heard it said that Michael says bad things not because he's bad, but because he's simply oblivious, and that deep down he's an okay guy. I have to disagree. He chooses to remain ignorant and covers his ears when his superiors try to teach him appropriate behaviour. He also bullies Toby, a man who's clearly depressed. We have 7 seasons of Michael being a terrible person, so I'm just going to pick out some highlights. When Michael is giving a presentation at Ryan's college, he tears the pages out of his student's textbook, and as he hands it back, he says, "I know these are expensive." We have the incident with Scott's tots. He promised to pay for the college tuition of a classroom full of kids, yet does nothing to ensure he can fulfill this promise. He comes up with really petty ways to punish Dwight for going behind his back, and all this after he supposedly forgave him. He breaks up with Pam's mum on her birthday because he finds out how old she is. And he continues dating Donna after he discovers that she's married, albeit briefly. Michael is a textbook narcissist. He needs to be liked. He needs to feel superior to everyone he comes across, even if it means tearing others down. A clear and early example of this is when we see that while Dwight may have entertained 1,000 people with his speech, he entertained Dwight. So by extension, Dwight's accomplishments are his accomplishments. Michael's vanity informs almost every decision he ever makes. Even when he is being nice, it can be traced back to his selfish desire for the approval of everyone around him. Some could even argue that Michael is the worst person in the office. However, everyone below him on this list does something willful and tangible to the significant detriment of the people around them. Number 6 is Oscar. Like Pam, Oscar spends a lot of time in this series being a completely decent human being. He may not be warm like Pam, but he's patient and tolerant. Also like Pam, he could have been a contender for the top spot, except for one thing: the senator. Oscar sits across from Angela every day of the week for years, and yet he has an ongoing affair with her husband that ends up destroying her marriage. He's fully aware that what he's doing isn't fair on Angela, and yet he does it anyway. What he does is horrible, but it's really the only bad thing he does in the series, which is why he isn't ranked higher. Number 5 is Dwight. Now, on the whole, I feel sorry for Dwight. He's raised to be ruthlessly efficient, and it tarnishes his social interactions. We can't wholly blame his upbringing, though, as his brother and sister, while far from perfect, turned out much more socially functional than Dwight did. It's very difficult for him to be an agreeable person. Even when he's trying to be nice to Pam, he ends up saying the wrong thing. A lot of the time, I think Dwight doesn't realise that he's being mean, and couldn't be nice even if he did. The reason he ranks so highly on this list is that he continues to sleep with Angela when she's engaged to Andy. Andy goes to a lot of effort to make Angela happy and spends a lot of money trying to plan their wedding, and Dwight is, well, cucking him the whole time. He also gets angry at Angela for sleeping with Andy while she was engaged to him, as if Dwight were the one being cheated on, which is hugely hypocritical. As a side note, he also euthanized Angela's cat, Sprinkles, and despite what he claimed, it definitely wasn't done out of pure pragmatism. It's clear that part of him simply couldn't be bothered to take care of the cat. At one point, he also talks about a contraption he's made to cut the maximum amount of meat from a horse without killing it. Let that sink in for a second. That is diabolical, and makes me wonder if he has any empathy at all. But I think this is just another case of the writers crossing that invisible line. Number 4 is Stanley. Stanley is a real grumpy guts. He's cynical and standoffish. His one redeeming quality, however, is his love for his family. He works a job he hates to support his wife and children. When he's asked if he knows any games, he replies, "Yeah, it's called work hard so my kids can go to college." Later on in the series, however, he abandons his one redeeming quality, his family, by having multiple affairs. In the final episode, we learn that he's used his savings to move away and retire. He does nothing to support the family he's supposedly worked so hard to provide for. Number 3 is Creed. Now, Creed is implied to be a murderer, and if he is, then he belongs at the top of this list, but we don't actually know that. Creed is clearly not in possession of his faculties, and I think it's more than likely he's a murderer only in his own mind. That in itself is a point against him, however. His ranking of 3rd is given to him based only on the crimes we know for sure that he's committed. They are as follows. Despite Creed's desperation to keep his job, he never does any work. When it looks like his laziness may lead to him losing his job due to the watermark incident, he throws an innocent worker, Debbie, under the bus. Then he collects money from his co-workers supposedly to give to Debbie and ends up keeping it for himself. When it's looking like the branch may close, he sells off as much company property as he can. He also creates fake IDs so that minors can get alcohol and possesses at least one fake identity himself. Murderer or not, he belongs in jail. In 2nd place is Ryan. Ryan is a sociopath. Not once in this series does he show any empathy or concern for the feelings of others. He commits major fraud, costing his company a lot of money. He lies at the drop of a hat, like when he tells Kelly that Karen asked him out while they were dating. The nicest thing he does during the series is allowing Pam to design the website logo, which is quickly revealed to be a ploy to seduce her. Finally, his greatest crime, which came so close to landing him the top spot. He leaves his infant son in the care of a complete stranger and runs away with Kelly. Let me say that again. He leaves his infant son in the care of a complete stranger. And that's only after he gives his child an allergic reaction, just so he can distract Kelly's fiancée and flirt with her. He also doesn't really get better over time. After all he goes through in the series, getting arrested, overcoming drug addiction, he's still basically the same jerk. Now, you've probably worked out the winner by process of elimination. Angela. I'm overcome with disgust every time she's on the screen. She's judgmental, racist, and homophobic. In fact, she's completely disdainful of anyone she perceives to be other to herself. She's a despicable human being. She's constantly cruel to the people who should be her closest friends, like Phyllis and Oscar. And as soon as she and Dwight break up, she's cruel to him as well. She cheats on Andy and makes it very difficult for him to plan their wedding, at great expense to Andy himself. She also cheats on the senator. At Diwali, she tries to use her vegetarianism to get out of eating Indian food, and when she's told that it's all vegetarian, she abandons the pretense and just eats bread. She also tells everyone that Kelly can do whatever she wants in her own home as long as she doesn't try to impose her values on others. Meanwhile, Angela herself is constantly trying to impose her own values on everyone she meets. She's a hypocrite, completely and utterly. She spends the whole series claiming to be a Christian while betraying every value the Bible upholds. Her religion is nothing to her but an excuse to be a bigot. Now granted, she never does anything as bad as Ryan abandoning his son, but Angela does many things that are, in my opinion, almost as bad. Foremost among Angela's crimes is lying to Dwight about their son. Dwight does not get to be a father to his son Philip until he's already a toddler. Even when Angela does confess Philip's parentage to Dwight, her motivations are ambiguous, but are likely due to her unwillingness to raise Philip alone, and Dwight being her only option. In addition to her many flaws, Angela has, in my opinion, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And on that happy note, that's all I've got for you. I'm keen to hear in the comments if you would change any of my rankings and why. I'd also be interested to hear where you'd place some of the characters I didn't include, like Erin or Jan or Robert. Thanks for watching, see you later.